When Captain Naomi Carter arrived at the airport that day, she expected a routine flight. She didn't expect to be stopped, questioned, and treated like an outsider by a fellow pilot who refused to believe she belonged. But what started as an act of arrogance quickly spiraled into a dangerous game of sabotage, deception, and revenge. As Naomi fought to clear her name, one desperate man went to extreme lengths to destroy her career. What he didn't realize, he wasn't dealing with just any pilot, because Naomi Carter wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting to prove that no one, no matter how powerful or bitter, could take away what she had earned. This is a story of twists, betrayals, and a final showdown that no one saw coming. Will justice prevail? Or will a man fueled by vengeance succeed in bringing her down? Watch until the end to find out. And if you love stories packed with drama, suspense, and powerful comebacks, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Captain Naomi Carter had long learned to navigate the turbulence of the skies, but nothing compared to the unseen turbulence of prejudice. As she strode across the tarmac toward her jet, she took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself for the upcoming flight. But she never expected to be stopped before she could even board. The man standing before her was Michael Reynolds, a senior pilot who worked for a private airline. With his polished shoes, crisp uniform, and the self-assured stance of someone who rarely got questioned, he looked every bit the part of a seasoned aviator. His problem? He did not believe she belonged here. Naomi smiled politely. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," Reynolds said, his tone clipped. "I need to see your credentials. This is a restricted area, and private jets require proper clearance." Naomi reached into her pocket and pulled out her ID. "Here." Reynolds barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "This doesn't prove anything. Who are you flying for?" Naomi arched a brow. "Myself," Reynolds scoffed. "Oh, so you chartered this plane?" Naomi held his gaze for a moment, then sighed. "I own it." A pause. Then laughter. Short, sharp, dismissive. "Right," Reynolds smirked. "And I suppose next you'll tell me you built it yourself?" Before Naomi could reply, she heard footsteps approaching. A security officer arrived, alerted by the conversation. "Everything all right here?" the officer asked, glancing between them. "This woman claims to own this aircraft," Reynolds said, gesturing toward Naomi as if she were some uninvited guest. "I was just verifying her credentials." The officer frowned. "Miss, do you have proof of ownership?" Naomi exhaled. "Here we go again." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick file of documents, complete with purchase agreements, flight logs, and maintenance records. The officer took them, flipping through the pages carefully. His expression changed within seconds. "Ma'am," he said, clearing his throat, "this is indeed registered under your name. Everything checks out." Reynolds' smirk disappeared. "What?" Naomi crossed her arms. "Would you like to inspect my pilot's license too? Or will you just assume I can't fly?" The officer handed back the documents, nodding. "Sorry for the trouble, Captain Carter." Naomi turned back to Reynolds. "I hope next time you won't judge someone before knowing the facts." But before she could step forward, another voice cut in. Captain Carter, a well-dressed businessman, hurried toward them. His tailored suit and confident stride spoke of power. Reynolds' face paled as he recognized the man. This was James Lockwood, a billionaire investor and one of the most influential figures in aviation. "Mr. Lockwood," Reynolds greeted nervously. Lockwood barely acknowledged him, instead stopping in front of Naomi with a broad smile. "I hope I'm not too late. I didn't want to keep my pilot waiting." Reynolds blinked. "Wait. Your pilot?" Naomi smirked. "Yes. I am flying Mr. Lockwood today." Reynolds looked like he had been punched in the gut. The security officer raised an eyebrow, amused at how quickly the tables had turned. Lockwood turned to Reynolds, his voice suddenly sharp. "Is there a reason you were delaying my flight, Captain Reynolds?" Reynolds stammered. I thought she..." Lockwood sighed. You thought wrong. Naomi gave Reynolds one last look before stepping onto her plane. Enjoy your day, Captain, she said smoothly before disappearing inside. Reynolds stood frozen, watching as the jet door sealed shut and the aircraft prepared for takeoff. He had made a grave mistake, and it was only the beginning. As the engines roared to life, Captain Naomi Carter settled into the cockpit with the ease of a seasoned pilot. The control panel glowed softly under her fingertips, every switch and dial second nature to her. Outside, the sun reflected off the sleek silver body of her private jet. It was a perfect day for flying, but on the tarmac, the storm was only beginning. Michael Reynolds stood stiffly, still processing what had just happened. He had dismissed Naomi as an intruder and imposter. Now, she was in the captain's seat of a jet carrying James Lockwood, one of the most powerful men in the industry. Reynolds clenched his jaw. How could this be happening? Captain Reynolds, Lockwood's voice cut through his thoughts. The billionaire turned to the security officer. I assume everything is in order now? The officer nodded. Yes, sir. Captain Carter's credentials are fully verified. Lockwood's piercing gaze landed back on Reynolds. Then perhaps you can explain why you delayed my pilot with your concerns? Reynolds felt his throat tighten. I was just following standard security procedures. Lockwood's lips pressed into a thin line. Standard procedures? Or personal assumptions? The question hung in the air, heavier than the jet itself. A small crowd had gathered nearby, other pilots, ground crew, and airport staff, all whispering among themselves. Reynolds' face burned under their scrutiny. His confidence, once unshakable, was cracking. Lockwood exhaled sharply, shaking his head. This isn't the first time I've heard complaints about you, Reynolds. Reynolds' head snapped up. Sir, Lockwood held up a hand. Enough. We'll discuss this later. His voice was calm, but the warning was clear. With that, Lockwood turned and headed toward his personal vehicle, leaving Reynolds standing in silence. For the first time in his career, Michael Reynolds felt like he was the one under inspection. Inside the cockpit, Naomi adjusted the flight settings, her hands steady as ever. But beneath her composed exterior, she was furious. She had encountered men like Reynolds before. The type who believed skill had a color. The type who questioned her credentials, no matter how many flight hours she had logged. But today, he had learned a lesson. Captain Carter, a voice crackled through her headset. It was her co-pilot, Ethan Blake, a young but talented first officer. We just received confirmation from ATC. We're cleared for takeoff. Roger that. Naomi replied, scanning the final checklist. Ethan hesitated. I heard what happened outside. Naomi's hands didn't stop moving as she adjusted the throttle. I'm sure you did. Everyone did. Ethan exhaled. Honestly, I don't know how you keep your cool in situations like that. Naomi glanced at him, a small smirk playing at her lips. Experience, Ethan. Lots of experience. As the jet accelerated down the runway, the ground fell away and they soared into the sky. Up here, there were no barriers, no prejudices, just the open sky. For a moment, Naomi allowed herself to enjoy the freedom of flying. But down below, Michael Reynolds was already planning his next move. And he wasn't done yet. Reynolds stormed into the pilot's lounge, his mind racing. The humiliation, the whispers, the look in Lockwood's eyes, he knew he was in serious trouble. He grabbed his phone, dialing a number. Yeah, he muttered, voice low. I need some information on Captain Naomi Carter. Now. A pause. Whatever you can find. Anything I can use. He hung up, his fingers tightening around the device. If Naomi Carter thought she had won, she was wrong. Because Reynolds had just decided this wasn't over. At 35,000 feet, Captain Naomi Carter felt most at home. The sky stretched endlessly before her, and the hum of the engines beneath her hands was a familiar comfort. In the air, she was in control. No judgment. No obstacles. Just skill and precision. But even in the smoothest flights, turbulence could strike when least expected. And this time, the real turbulence wasn't in the air. It was waiting for her on the ground. Back at the airport, Michael Reynolds was pacing in the pilot's lounge, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. "You're sure?" he muttered. The voice on the other end was smug. "Positive. You wanted dirt on Naomi Carter? Well, I found something. She wasn't always a private jet pilot. Before this, she flew commercial. And before that..." Reynolds gripped his phone tighter. "Before that what?" "She was military. A combat pilot." Reynolds' eyes narrowed. "A fighter pilot?" "Not just any fighter pilot. She flew in classified operations. Black ops. High-stakes missions. Some of them so secret they were barely documented." Reynolds let out a low whistle. This changed everything. "So she's more than just some lucky woman who bought a jet," he muttered. "She's got serious credentials." The voice chuckled. "Oh, it gets better. Her last mission ended with a court-martial hearing." Reynolds stopped pacing. Now that was interesting. "She got cleared, obviously," the voice continued. "But there was controversy. Some people thought she disobeyed orders. Others thought she saved lives. The truth? Buried under military secrecy." A slow smirk spread across Reynolds' face. "So there's a stain on her perfect record." The voice laughed. "If you spin it right, there is." Reynolds ended the call and leaned back in his chair. This was his chance. If Naomi Carter had one flaw, one shadow in her past, he would make sure it was dragged into the light. Unaware of the storm brewing beneath her, Naomi checked her flight instruments while Ethan Blake, her co-pilot, monitored air traffic control. "We'll begin descent in 20 minutes, Ethan noted. "Weather looks good over Miami." Naomi nodded. "Copy that. Start prepping for landing." But as she glanced at her navigation screen, something felt off. A moment of hesitation. A gut feeling. She had learned long ago that intuition was as important as technical skill. And right now something was wrong. "Ethan," she said, keeping her voice even, "pull up the latest security alerts." Ethan frowned, but complied. A few seconds later, his eyes widened. "Captain," he said slowly, "there's an advisory for Miami International. A flagged security checks under your name." Naomi stiffened. "My name?" Ethan nodded. "Someone's filed a report. It says your clearance needs to be re-verified before landing authorization is granted." Naomi's fingers tightened around the controls. She had never seen this happen before. "Who filed it?" she asked. Ethan checked again. "It doesn't say. It just states that concerns have been raised regarding Captain Naomi Carter's background." Naomi's jaw clenched. Michael Reynolds. Of course, he wouldn't let this go. Ethan hesitated. "Should we contact Lockwood?" Naomi took a slow breath. "No, not yet." She had faced far worse than Reynolds before. If he thought he could shake her with a cheap stunt, he was sorely mistaken. "Request direct clearance override," she ordered. "Let's see who has the power to challenge my credentials." Ethan nodded, transmitting the request. Moments later, a response came in. "Captain Carter," the ATC officer said, voice neutral but firm. "We are reviewing your clearance now. Stand by." Naomi exchanged a look with Ethan. Stand by? For what? Whatever Reynolds had done, this wasn't over. Captain Naomi Carter kept her expression calm, but inside, her frustration simmered. A flagged security checks? This was no coincidence. Someone Michael Reynolds was trying to ground her. But if Reynolds thought she would roll over and accept this, he had severely underestimated the wrong woman. She adjusted her headset and addressed air traffic control. "Miami Center, this is Captain Naomi Carter of November, Tango 24. I'm requesting immediate clarification on my security hold. My credentials were verified before departure. What's the issue?" There was a pause. Then a male voice responded. "Captain Carter, We received a report questioning your authorization status. Your landing clearance is temporarily suspended pending review. Naomi exhaled slowly. Understood. Who filed the report? That information is classified. Classified. She clenched her jaw. Of course it is. Her co-pilot, Ethan Blake, looked uneasy. Captain, what do we do? We can't just circle here forever. Naomi's mind worked quickly. She had spent years in the military, where split-second decisions meant life or death. Right now, she had three options. 1. Comply, wait for ATC to sort things out, wasting fuel and precious time. Unacceptable. 2. Push back, demand immediate clearance, risking escalation. Too aggressive. 3. Leverage her power, find someone who outranked whoever filed the complaint. The smart play. Naomi made her choice. She reached for the private intercom to the cabin. Within seconds, James Lockwood's voice came through. Captain Carter, is there a problem? Potentially, she replied. Someone flagged my security clearance. We are being held in a holding pattern, pending verification. Lockwood's silence spoke volumes. Then his voice turned sharp. Who filed it? They won't say. A pause. Then Lockwood exhaled, clearly irritated. Give me 5 minutes. Stay on course. Naomi nodded. Roger that. She ended the call, turned to Ethan, and smirked. Let's see how fast a billionaire can clear airspace. Back at Miami International, Michael Reynolds stood near an airport lounge window, watching Naomi's jet circling above. He smirked. She's stuck. Reynolds had made one call to an old friend in aviation security, suggesting that Naomi Carter's background had unresolved concerns. Nothing specific, just enough to trigger a review. And now, she was delayed, questioned, and put under a microscope. It was exactly what she deserved. His phone buzzed. A message from his contact. We flagged her clearance. Review should take at least an hour. Maybe more. Reynolds grinned. Perfect. But his satisfaction was short-lived. Because just then his phone rang. And when he saw the name on the screen, James Lockwood, his stomach dropped. Reynolds hesitated, then answered. Mr. Lockwood, Captain Reynolds. Lockwood's voice was like steel. Tell me you had nothing to do with this. Reynolds hesitated. I don't know what you mean, sir. You don't? Lockwood's tone sharpened. Because I just spoke to the FAA director. Naomi Carter's clearance has been fully reinstated. Do you know what that means? Reynolds swallowed hard. It means, Lockwood continued, whoever filed that report is about to have a very bad day. Reynolds' pulse pounded in his ears. Sir, I was just. Lockwood cut him off. Do not lie to me. Silence. Then Lockwood spoke one last time. You're done, Reynolds. The line went dead. And for the first time in his career, Michael Reynolds felt fear. Up in the cockpit, Naomi and Ethan watched as the control tower finally came through. November, Tango, 24, this is Miami, ATC. Your clearance is reinstated. You're cleared for direct approach. Welcome to Miami. Ethan exhaled in relief. Lockwood works fast. Naomi smirked. That's what billionaires do. As she guided the jet toward the runway, she allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. Michael Reynolds had tried to ground her, and he had failed. But something told her this wasn't over, because men like Reynolds never learned. They only got desperate. And desperation was dangerous. The landing at Miami International Airport was as smooth as ever. But Captain Naomi Carter knew better than to think the turbulence was over. As she taxied the jet toward the private hangar, her mind stayed sharp. Michael Reynolds had tried to ground her. He failed. But if there was one thing she had learned from years in the military, it was this: a cornered opponent is the most dangerous one. Ethan Blake, her co-pilot, let out a breath of relief. Well, that was intense. Naomi chuckled dryly. You get used to it. Ethan shook his head. I don't think I ever want to get used to it. As soon as the engines shut down, the ground crew moved in. The aircraft door opened, and James Lockwood stepped forward, looking every bit the powerful billionaire that he was. "Captain Carter," he greeted, his tone professional but laced with irritation. "I assume you're aware of what just happened?" Naomi unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to him. "I have a pretty good guess." Lockwood sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Michael Reynolds. He was behind it." Naomi didn't react. She had suspected as much, but confirmation only solidified her next move. "He had someone in security flag your clearance," Lockwood continued. "Tried to keep you circling long enough to cause trouble. But I shut it down. Permanently." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You mean?" "Reynolds is finished," Lockwood said simply. "I just spoke to his employer. He's been terminated." Naomi nodded, but something didn't sit right. Reynolds was out of a job, which meant one thing: he had nothing to lose. And desperate men make reckless decisions. Michael Reynolds sat in his car outside the airport, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His entire career gone. "Fired," he muttered bitterly. Just like that. After years of building his reputation. One stupid mistake had ended everything. And for what? Because of her? He looked down at his phone, scrolling through old flight logs, personnel files, anything he could find about Naomi Carter. He had lost his job, but she was still flying. She had won. Unless... His eyes narrowed as he pulled up her old military record. The court-martial. The mission gone wrong. The classified details. His lips curled into a dangerous smirk. If he was going down, he would make sure she went down with him. Naomi stepped out of the cockpit and into the hangar, the Florida sun casting sharp shadows on the pavement. Ethan followed, his face still tense. "Captain, I don't like this," he admitted. "Reynolds just lost everything. What if he..." "Try something?" Naomi finished. She exhaled. "I know. And I'm prepared." Ethan frowned. "What do we do?" Naomi turned to Lockwood, who had been on his phone, giving orders to his legal team. "Lockwood," she said, "Reynolds won't let this go. He's going to dig." Lockwood nodded grimly. "Let him." "You don't understand," Naomi said. "He's going to find my past." Lockwood's gaze sharpened. "The court-martial?" Naomi hesitated, then nodded. Ethan looked between them. "Wait, court-martial? You were in a court-martial?" Naomi exhaled slowly. "A long time ago. It was a classified mission. I made a call that saved lives, but not everyone agreed with my decision." Ethan blinked. "So, were you found guilty?" "No," Naomi said firmly. "I was cleared. But the controversy remained." Lockwood's jaw tightened. "And if Reynolds finds it..." "He'll twist it," Naomi said. "He'll make it look like I was guilty." A beat of silence. Then Lockwood's eyes hardened. "Then we make sure he doesn't get the chance." Naomi met his gaze. "We're not going to stop him?" Lockwood smirked. "No. We're going to let him dig. And then we'll bury him." Naomi's lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. If Michael Reynolds wanted a fight, he had just picked one with the wrong people. Michael Reynolds sat hunched over his laptop in a dimly lit motel room, his fingers racing across the keyboard. The stale air smelled of cheap coffee and desperation, but he hardly noticed. He had spent hours digging through old military reports, classified files, and legal records, anything with Naomi Carter's name on it. And finally, he had found what he was looking for. A court-martial, a classified mission, a controversy that had never fully gone away. A slow, dangerous grin spread across his face. "This," he muttered, "is going to ruin her." He clicked on his email and typed a message to a well-known aviation blogger attaching the files. Exclusive tip: a disgraced ex-military pilot is flying private clients under a cloud of secrecy. Naomi Carter was nearly court-martialed for disobeying direct orders. Did she put lives in danger? Should she even be allowed to fly? Your readers deserve the truth. He hit send and leaned back in his chair. Now, he just had to wait. Naomi Carter sat in a luxury airport lounge, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee, but her focus elsewhere. She knew exactly what Reynolds was doing. She had seen men like him before. Bitter, desperate, dangerous. But this time, she was ready. James Lockwood sat across from her, his phone buzzing constantly. His legal team had been monitoring online activity, waiting for the moment Reynolds made his move. Still nothing? Naomi asked. Lockwood smirked. Oh, it's coming. He's arrogant enough to think this will work. And when it does, Ethan Blake, sitting beside Naomi, shifted uncomfortably. So we're just letting him go through with this. Naomi set her cup down and met his gaze. Ethan, if we fight him now, he'll just find another way. But if we let him think he's won, he'll expose himself. Lockwood nodded. We don't just want to stop him. We want to bury him. Ethan exhaled. All right. Then we wait. And so they did. 2 hours later, Lockwood's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then grinned. He took the bait. Naomi smirked. Checkmate. The next morning, aviation blogs exploded with headlines. Pilot Naomi Carter, hero or reckless rebel? Court-martial controversy resurfaces, should she still be flying? Exclusive. The secret past of a private jet captain. Reynolds sat in his motel room, watching the articles spread across social media. It was working. Or at least he thought. It was. But then something changed. Comments began flooding in, and they weren't what he expected. Wait, so she disobeyed orders to save people? That sounds like a hero, not a disgrace. The military cleared her, so why is this even an issue? Who dug this up? Someone really hates seeing a successful black female pilot, huh? Reynolds' smirk faltered. Then, the final blow hit. James Lockwood himself released an official statement. Naomi Carter is one of the most skilled and honorable pilots I've ever had the privilege to work with. The so-called controversy being spread is nothing more than a desperate attempt to discredit a remarkable woman. Captain Carter was cleared of all accusations years ago. This attack is baseless and frankly pathetic. Reynolds froze. Pathetic? His stomach twisted as more responses flooded in. The internet had turned on him. He hadn't exposed Naomi Carter. He had made her a hero. And worse, they had found him. Someone had linked the story back to him, a former pilot, just fired, with a grudge against Naomi. The narrative had flipped. He was the villain. His phone rang. He stared at it, dread creeping into his chest. It was a lawyer. And just like that, he knew it was over. Naomi sat in Lockwood's private office, watching the news unfold. She had expected the backlash against Reynolds, but the public support? That was a pleasant surprise. Ethan grinned. I don't think he'll be bothering you again. Lockwood smirked. No, he won't. He's just been hit with a defamation lawsuit. And with my legal team, he won't have a penny left when this is over. Naomi leaned back in her chair, finally allowing herself to breathe. Michael Reynolds had tried to bury her career. Instead, he had destroyed his own. And Naomi Carter? She was soaring higher than ever. Michael Reynolds sat in silence, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop. The articles, the backlash, the lawsuit, it had all spiraled completely out of his control. He had wanted revenge. Instead, he had become the villain in a story where Naomi Carter emerged as a hero. And now, his phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls he didn't want to answer. The last message from his lawyer had been short but devastating. Lockwood's team is moving forward with the lawsuit. You need to settle. Immediately. Settle? He had no money left to settle anything. A fresh wave of rage and humiliation burned through him. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. And yet, here he was, grounded, jobless, exposed. And Naomi Carter? She was still flying. His hands curled into fists. There had to be one last move he could make. Something desperate. Naomi Carter stood on the balcony of her Miami hotel, looking out over the ocean. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting streaks of gold and crimson across the sky. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of calm. Reynolds had made his play. He had tried to bring her down, but instead, he had only lifted her higher. Lockwood had personally assured her that the lawsuit would strip him of everything: his reputation, his finances, his ability to ever work in aviation again. It was over. Or at least that's what she wanted to believe. But something still felt off. Years of military experience had taught Naomi to trust her instincts. And right now, her instincts were warning her that this wasn't finished yet. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It was Ethan. "Hey," she answered. "You need to see this," Ethan said, his voice tense. Naomi frowned. "See what?" "Check your email. Now." She pulled out her tablet, opened her inbox, and saw the message Ethan had forwarded. A security alert from Miami International Airport. Her name was on it. Her jet's hangar had been accessed. And she hadn't authorized it. Naomi's heart pounded as she scanned the report. The security cameras had captured someone breaking into her aircraft. And when she saw who it was, her stomach twisted into a knot. Michael Reynolds. How the hell did he get into my plane? Naomi demanded as she and Ethan rushed toward the private hangar. "Security is still trying to figure that out," Ethan said. "But Naomi, this isn't just some stupid stunt. He was inside for 10 minutes. That's enough time to do anything." Her blood ran cold. As they reached the hangar, Lockwood was already there, speaking to airport security. The tension in his expression told her everything she needed to know. Captain Carter, the head of security, greeted, his face grim. "We're still assessing the damage, but it appears Reynolds entered your aircraft with a purpose." Naomi's voice was sharp. "Did he plan anything?" The security officer hesitated, then handed her a tablet. It showed the security footage from inside her jet. She watched as Reynolds moved through the cockpit, the cargo hold, and the passenger cabin. He wasn't just looking around, he was doing something. And then he tampered with a panel in the cockpit. Naomi's stomach dropped. "Shut everything down," she ordered. "We're not flying this plane until it's been swept completely." Lockwood nodded. "Already on it. My security team is bringing in specialists." Ethan shook his head, stunned. "He's lost his mind." Naomi knew that, but what she didn't know was what had he done. She turned back to the security officer. "Where is he now?" The officer's face darkened. "He left the airport. We're trying to track him down." Naomi clenched her jaw. This wasn't over. Michael Reynolds wasn't just desperate. He was dangerous. And she had no intention of letting him win. Naomi Carter stood at the edge of her jet's open door, staring at the security footage on the tablet. The grainy black and white video looped over and over, but her eyes were fixed on one moment: Michael Reynolds kneeling by a cockpit panel, his hands moving with a dangerous sense of purpose. She had seen enough. Turning sharply, she faced Lockwood, Ethan, and the airport security team. "We need a full systems check on the jet. I don't care how long it takes, we're not flying until every wire, every bolt, every circuit has been examined." Lockwood nodded. "Already making calls. My engineers will be here in 20 minutes. Ethan crossed his arms, his jaw tight with anger. What the hell was he trying to do? Sabotage your plane? Naomi exhaled slowly. "I don't know, but I'm not about to find out the hard way." The head of security stepped forward. "We also have teams reviewing every inch of the hangar. If Reynolds tampered with anything else, we'll find it." Naomi nodded. "Good. But that's only half the problem." She turned to Lockwood. "Where is he now?" Lockwood's expression hardened. "He left the airport over an hour ago. We have some security footage of him exiting through a back gate, but after that, nothing." Naomi's fingers curled into fists. Michael Reynolds was out there, and if he had done something to her plane, he wouldn't just disappear quietly. This wasn't over. 30 minutes later, the engineering team arrived. The moment they stepped onto the plane, they began their inspection, scanning for any signs of tampering. Naomi, Ethan, and Lockwood waited outside watching. The minutes dragged. Then a voice crackled over the comms. "Captain Carter, we found something." Naomi's stomach tightened. "What is it?" A pause. Then, "We need you to see this for yourself." She and Lockwood exchanged a tense glance before climbing aboard. Inside the cockpit, the lead engineer knelt beside an open panel, where a small black device was tucked between wires and circuits. Naomi felt the air leave her lungs. A transponder disruptor. It wasn't a bomb, but it was almost as bad. If they had taken off without catching it, the device could have interfered with their communications and tracking systems. The jet could have gone completely off radar. And that was a death trap waiting to happen. Ethan's voice was low, furious. "He wanted you to disappear." Naomi clenched her jaw. "No. He wanted to make it look like I was careless, that I lost control. Maybe even make it look like I crashed the plane." Lockwood's expression darkened. "We're pressing charges." Naomi nodded sharply. "Agreed. But first we find him." Her eyes burned with determination. Michael Reynolds had gone too far. And now, she was going to stop him. Michael Reynolds knew he was running out of time. Sitting in a cheap hotel room on the outskirts of Miami, he checked the news, his hands trembling. His plan had failed. Naomi Carter hadn't taken off. They had found the device. And now they were coming for him. He grabbed his bag stuffed with cash, a fake ID, and a plane ticket. He had one shot at getting out of the country before Lockwood's lawyers, airport security, and the FAA came down on him like a hammer. His flight to Mexico left in 2 hours. He just had to make it to the airport. But he never would. Because at that exact moment, a black SUV pulled into the motel parking lot. And stepping out of it was Naomi Carter. Her eyes locked onto his room window. And for the first time in his life, Michael Reynolds felt true fear. Michael Reynolds' pulse pounded in his ears as he spotted Naomi Carter stepping out of the black SUV. She wasn't alone. James Lockwood and 2 security officers flanked her, their movements calm, precise, dangerous. Michael backed away from the window, his mind racing. How did they find me so fast? His flight to Mexico left in 2 hours. He just needed to make it to the airport. But now Naomi Carter was standing between him and his only way out. His eyes darted to his bag cash, fake ID, passport. All useless if he couldn't get past her. His only option? Run. His motel door had a back exit. If he could just, a loud knock shattered his thoughts. Michael's breath caught in his throat. "Michael Reynolds." Naomi's voice was steady, sharp. "Open the door." Michael didn't move. "We know you're in there," Lockwood added. "And in case you're thinking about running, don't." Michael clenched his jaw. He wasn't going to sit here and wait to be dragged out like a criminal. He grabbed his bag, turned toward the back door and froze. Because standing right outside the back exit was another security officer. His heart sank. They had boxed him in. Knowing he had no other choice, Michael turned back to the front door. Slowly, he unlocked it and pulled it open. Naomi stood there, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Lockwood stepped forward, his jaw tight. "You've made a lot of mistakes, Reynolds. But this? Tampering with a jet? That's not just reckless. It's criminal." Michael forced a smirk, even as his chest tightened. "You can't prove anything." Naomi arched a brow. "Oh, we already did." Lockwood tossed a tablet onto the motel bed. The screen played the security footage from the hangar, the clear, undeniable video of Reynolds sneaking onto Naomi's jet, planting the device. Michael felt cold sweat form on the back of his neck. "Tampering with aircraft systems is a federal crime," Naomi continued, stepping closer. "You wanted to ruin me? You nearly got innocent people killed." Michael's hands curled into fists. "I wasn't trying to kill anyone." Naomi's eyes flashed. "Then what was the plan, Reynolds? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you were setting me up for a disaster." Michael's chest heaved. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she snapped. "You lost your job because of your own choices. And instead of taking responsibility, you came after me." You wanted me to go down so you wouldn't have to face your own failure. Michael opened his mouth, but no words came out. Because she was right. Lockwood exhaled sharply. The only reason we're standing here having this conversation instead of letting law enforcement handle it, he paused, his eyes narrowing, is because Naomi wanted to look you in the eye before we end this. Michael's stomach dropped. End this? Naomi's voice was like steel. You have two choices, Reynolds. One, you turn yourself in and face the charges. Or two. She leaned in slightly, her voice lowering. I let the FAA, the FBI, and the entire aviation industry make an example out of you. And trust me, you won't like how that ends. Michael's throat tightened. If he fought this, he would lose everything. If he ran, they would hunt him down. And if he cooperated, maybe, just maybe, he could walk away with something left. He swallowed hard. What do you want me to do? Naomi didn't break eye contact. Confess. Publicly. Admit what you did, and sign a full legal statement taking responsibility. No deals. No excuses. You come clean, or you take your chances in court. Michael looked at Lockwood, who simply nodded. You have 10 seconds to decide, Naomi added. Michael's hands shook. His entire career, his reputation, his future hanging in the balance. And then he broke. His shoulders slumped. His expression twisted with defeat. I'll confess, he muttered. Naomi studied him, making sure he wasn't bluffing. Finally, she gave a single nod. Good choice. Michael let out a shaky breath. It was over. And Naomi Carter? She had won. 2 days later, the world knew everything. Michael Reynolds' public confession spread across every major aviation news outlet. In a recorded statement under legal supervision, he admitted to breaking into Naomi Carter's jet, tampering with the transponder, and attempting to frame her. The fallout was swift and brutal. The FAA permanently revoked his pilot's license. The airline industry blacklisted him. And Lockwood's legal team ensured he faced multiple criminal charges. Michael Reynolds was finished. And Naomi Carter? She was finally free. Naomi stood on the rooftop of Lockwood Aviation's Miami headquarters, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and deep violet. Beside her, Ethan Blake sipped a coffee. So that's it, huh? Naomi smiled. That's it. Reynolds had tried everything to take her down. And now? She was still flying. Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. Honestly, I don't know how you kept your cool through all of that. Naomi chuckled. Years of practice. Ethan grinned. Yeah, but still. He was a real piece of work. Naomi's gaze turned thoughtful. People like him always are. They think they're untouchable. That they can rewrite reality if they push hard enough. She turned to Ethan. But the truth? It always catches up. To them. Ethan lifted his cup. To the truth, then. Naomi smirked and clinked her water bottle against his. To the truth. The next morning, Naomi stepped onto the tarmac, breathing in the crisp air. Her jet sat waiting, polished, and ready for takeoff. Lockwood approached. His usual sharp business demeanor softened with satisfaction. I just got word. Reynolds took a plea deal. He'll never fly again. Naomi nodded. Good. He made his choices. Lockwood studied her. And what about you? She smiled, stepping toward her aircraft. I'll do what I always do. Lockwood smirked. Keep flying? Always, Naomi said. As she climbed into the cockpit, she ran her hands over the controls, her true home. No one could take this from her. Not Michael Reynolds. Not anyone. With a final glance at the sky, she pushed forward the throttle. And as the jet lifted off the ground, Naomi Carter did what she did best. She soared. No matter how many obstacles stand in your way, the truth will always rise above the lies. Naomi Carter proved that skill, resilience, and integrity will always outshine jealousy and sabotage. What did you think of her journey? Have you ever faced a situation where someone tried to bring you down, only for karma to strike back? Let us know where in the world you're watching from in the comments. And if you love stories packed with twists, drama, and powerful comebacks, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that keeps you on the edge of your seat. See you in the next one.